Clayman Media. Welcome to the We Bear Witness podcast. Tune in every week for practical Christianity, biblical teachings, and great conversation. Thanks for listening and enjoy the show.
Hey everyone, it is great to see you. Well, not really see you, but talk to you. And I'm glad you're tuning in to We Bear Witness podcast. We appreciate you. Interesting thing that really wanted to talk about tonight about issues that our children are facing that we never had to face. And I guess I can say we now. 39, I wouldn't say is incredibly old. I mean, you're only as old as you feel, right? But 39 is definitely at that age where it's brand new world, 18 and under. It's not even close. You're not young. If you're in your 30s, honestly, you're not considered young in your 20s, really, because it's just so young now. It's like, just young is like 15 to 18, and that's the world they're living in, man. It's just very aimed at them. Everything is really aimed at them. And so they're going through a whole mess of things that no one before them went through. And here's sort of the projection of this. And then we want to use this amazing book as sort of a guide. It's really an article that was put out by Crossway by Andrew Walker. He's a buddy of mine and his wife, Christian, who have written this amazing book, What Do I Say When? And it's a parent's guide to quick and trustworthy answers to questions that their children may ask about life's toughest topics. And these topics include abortion and sexuality, technology, and political engagement. And in this article, looking at the cultural landscape, it really gives us four main issues that our children are facing that you never had to face. And again, the whole point of this came from someone saying, one time I was preaching at a camp and they came up after and they said, it was right what you said. And they were kind of attempting encouragement and they were nice about it, but they said, yeah, but these kids, there's nothing they haven't gone through, or there's nothing they're not going through that we didn't have to go through. Well, number one, he was like 60 and I was like 39. So immediately I was kind of like, bro, we lived in completely different worlds. But I didn't take it as offense. It's fine. We're all together in this. But multi-generational. But really what it was him saying same sins. And he's right about same sins. He's right about there being the same sins that he experienced in 1960 that his grandkids or kids experienced throughout the 80s, 90s, 2000s. Well, here we are in 2024. And I'm telling you that your kids are facing things you never had to face. And there's a reason to understand this. You don't tell your kids there's nothing that you aren't going through that I didn't have to face. That's not the place to relate to them with, because it's just not true. It's not honest. There's no honesty to that because you didn't have a smartphone at your fingertips. I didn't even have Google in the 90s. We had to learn our information from our parents. And if it was wrong, that's what we believed for a long period of time. Until I was 16, I thought the clouds from the power plant, the smoke from the power plant were cloud makers. And I thought that if the ice cream truck played music, it was out of ice cream. I couldn't look this information up on Google. And now they don't have wonder. The generations don't have curiosity. They don't have the instigation to go do some deep dive research. And now you're not only entering... You're 20 years into just immediate smartphone responses in Google. Now you're into AI and artificial intelligence and voice speech and chat GPT. And so you're just into a mess of things that you had no clue existed in the 90s, let alone the 80s, 70s, and 60s. Look at real quick at what this quote says from this article in Crossway. It just talks about the four issues your children are facing you never had to. And again, it's pointing to Andrew and Christian's book, which I highly recommend. In fact, our church, in a couple of weeks, Pastor Forrest is starting a class. He's attaching this material to an existing Sunday school class during our first service called our Family Equipping class. And they're going to go through I think it's the 10 chapters of this book. I'm not done reading it, but everything I've read so far I've loved. And we're really considering buying a bunch of copies of this book and passing it out to our families of all ages, multi-generational. You're grandparenting well, parenting is forever. Get the book. Again, it's called What Do I Say When? And so I highly recommend it. But here are four of the issues that it tackles. So the question really is, what in America's cultural landscape has changed that requires more, and here's the key word, intentionality on the part of Christian parents? So these are issues that are not going to solve themselves. They're not going to be answered with passivity. They don't need to be. This is not going to happen accidentally in your home. They need to be warned, and they need to be told by the parents. The parents are the primary spiritual disciplers of their kids. That's not even the church's job. And yet we live sort of in a culture where you drop your kid off at the church to be parented spiritually, to be spiritually discipled. And a lot of parents have the mentality of, I'll coach them on the baseball field, but when it comes down to Bible study or the questions they have apologetically in the evening or in the morning when they rise about sexuality, that's just not my bag. We need to call a pastor in. And so without a doubt, what Andrew Walker says here, and I fully agree, the first issue that's changed, and we've touched a bit on this even already, is what has changed most dramatically over the past few decades is the scope of the moral revolution that has taken place concerning sexuality, is what he says. And this could not be more true. To openly declare a biblical Christian ethic about sexuality is incredibly controversial. We have this homily that I preach through for every wedding. I go over it with the couple, and sometimes we'll make some changes, but most of the time it stays the same. And in it, I'm fairly certain I offend people in 4 or 5 different ways. I start by saying a marriage is only between a man and a woman biblically. 2 men can't be married, 2 women can't be married in the eyes of God, and it be glorifying God. I put number 1, I think there's an inference that there is a man and then there is a woman, and that's where we are in society as well when it comes to sexuality. But it goes further to say that God looks down upon divorce. And I don't go into all the details. If you want to check our last episode out about that, we get into some specifics. But that marriage is meant to be permanent. And so there's all this stuff about sexuality that our kids need to know, and they're not hearing it from us. They're hearing it from TikTok. So Christians can affirm the inherent goodness of our sexual design, and they can do so openly, and they can do so responsibly with their kids. And while my parents may have set me down and had the sex talk, one thing that I can remember being sort of taboo in church was the conversation of sexuality. And I believe that there needs to be a respectful way to handle it. It needs to be taken seriously. And I'm speaking to all the pragmatic church who try to make things light to make them easier to deal with. Don't do that. Approach it in reverence and all like you would anything else. But understand, this is the generation of 15 to 18 that we're talking about specifically. Parents, your kids have access to things you couldn't dream about, you couldn't imagine or fantasize about. And not only do they have access to it for the most part, we're talking 15 to 18 here. 15 and under, your kids should not have a smartphone. Let's just go ahead and say that. But I have a smartphone so I can reach them. Then buy a beeper. Put a air tag on their necklace. I'm a firm believer, just from what I've seen, look, take it or leave it. I've been in ministry for 15 years. I would not give my kid a smartphone unless they are driving. And even then, if they're living under my household, there will be restrictions on that smartphone for their good and for accountability. So take that or leave that. That's fine. We can still be friends. But I would say that's very dangerous, because back in the 60s and 70s, you had to steal your dad's Playboy magazine. Now you can Google literally any sexual desire you'd like to see, and it will appear right there like a genie. And so this is the life they're living in, and it's constant. And it's on Instagram, and it's on Facebook to a degree. It's on Twitter. It's on TikTok. Snapchat is an app no one should have, and because of just the easy nature of deletion, the fact that it's almost built for affairs. So all of this goes into not a war against social networking, but a call for responsible social networking. And then also the realization that I think the Walkers are arriving at in this book, that the world has changed. The world hasn't just changed, it's changed drastically. The world's not even the same when it comes to sexuality as it was in 2010. Trump right now is essentially running on Bill Clinton sexual ethics and social ethics. Abortion, safe, legal, and rare. He's openly in favor of the LGBTQ. He has no problem with that. So times have changed in 30 years of American politics, which I'm skipping ahead a bit because that's one of the issues as well. But when it comes to sexuality, Christians are not motivated by self-righteousness when we state our biblical convictions on sexuality. I love that. No, we are motivated, and this is the point, to tell the truth about God's design for sexuality, marriage, and children's welfare, in hopes that all individuals would know that what it means to thrive and prosper. So you need to be teaching this in your churches. You need to be teaching it responsibly. And if you have a multi-generational worship service, find time to do it in reverence and in awe and in respect, and let your church know you're going to do it. You need to be teaching on sexuality, because if they're not going to hear it from the church, they're going to hear it from the world, and the world's going to appeal to their flesh. So our only hope, as always, is the Spirit. This leads to the second issue that your children are facing that you never had to, according to Andrew and Christian Walker from their new book. He says here, and I love how he says it, Tied to sexuality, that's his segue, is the modern notion of identity. He goes, identity language is everywhere. On the one hand, we can affirm the impulse to ground one's identity in hopes of having a sense of self-worth and purpose. But on the other hand, when individuals go searching for an identity that is built on human-centered understandings of happiness and fulfillment, sin's impact on our perception and our will ensures that we will try to ground our identity in places that are not ultimately fulfilling. And I think when he's saying about the difference in avenue, but the similarity in sin, identity has always been an issue since the beginning of time, since the beginning of man. But the issue here specifically for these young kids and these preteens and these teenagers and these young adults is they are open to a vast world at their fingertips as well. And culturally, the idea and the conversation in identity is rather skewed. You are in a postmodern era. You are in a your truth era. You are in a follow your heart era. We are, since 1989, Disney princesses have been telling us to follow our hearts. I mean, we talk about that when we watch Disney movies with our girls, and our girls will yell at the screen and say, you don't follow your heart. Your heart is wicked above all things. It puts a damper on the sleepovers, but it gets the job done. But I'm doing a D Now. We'll have, when this airs, I'll have finished the Discipleship Now weekend, but it's at Schindler Drive Baptist Church. And I'm talking about identity the whole time, that we are a royal priesthood. There's two major things I give them at the end. And I use this example of a cornerstone in 1 Peter 2, talking about who we are in Christ. This is something you should be going over with your kids each and every night of their lives. Before your kids go to bed, tell them that they are fearfully and wonderfully made, and that God has set them aside as children of God to be a royal priesthood in a darkened world, that they are supposed to be a living stone and a holy people. Talk about how they are to be separate for Christ, not separate for separate sake, but that their identity needs to be in Christ when their identity is in 1,000 things. I know a church in a surrounding county, I won't mention them, but not a church, I'm sorry, a school in a county that's close to us in Nassau County. And there is a rumor, which I don't know if it's true yet, that they're putting cat bowls in the bathrooms because there's some kids who identify as being cats. Now, I don't know how true that is. I know that crazier things than that have happened Northeast and West Coast, California. Are you kidding me? They've been doing that for years. You can identify as a goldfish out there. But where we are, Bible Belt South, Florida, Georgia line, it will find itself here because the identity politics of our age are completely askewed, and they have more choices than ever now. And the culture is saying, if you do it, feel it. If you do it, it's good. So what's Peter's whole objective? Peter's whole objective is to basically say, what is your cornerstone? Because that's what you're going to live your life on. It's what you're going to base your entire life on. Are you going to be the stone the builders rejected, a stone of stumbling, or a rock of offense? Or are you going to be a cornerstone chosen and precious? Because whoever believes in him will not be put to shame. And so you have this whole thing that your life will depict which cornerstone you're on. And so for Schindler Baptist to go over this Discipleship Now weekend and things I've preached at camps in the past, this Mercy Hill camp over twice, middle school and high school this past summer, I basically focused on cornerstone and said, you really need to see yourself as fearfully and wonderfully made because that's how Jesus sees you. And so I think you should tell your kids this every night to know who they are so that when the lies of the world come, they know the truth. That when some mean girl goes up to my daughter, like Joby Martin said, or some boy, and then Joby Martin said, who will not live as long as the girl, I mean, the father protective thing. He says, ultimately, when they get told lies by the world around us, who they are, what they should believe, what they need to identify with, who they need to align with, that they'll have scripture. They'll have the truth of God, which is irreplaceable, to say that, no, I don't believe that lie. I'm fearfully, wonderfully made, and I'm destined to do things for the glory of God. And so not only is it sexuality, but identity that's just drastically changed. And then Andrew and Christian Walker say this, that there's no better place to ground one's identity than in being God's image bearer. That identity is objective, it's universal, it's equal. See, it's not subjective, it's not relative, it's objective, that we were made for a purpose. And you'll either be loyal to that purpose or you won't. You'll either be a believer who's set aside for Christ and his glory, or you won't. So while it does not call us to neglect legitimate earthly identities like uncle, postman, boss, philanderer, it does call us to reject any identity that's grounded in sin, that is in sin no matter how hard or how heavy or how passionately we believe it. The third issue that they give us here tonight is technology. So not only is it sexuality and identity, but technology. And this is really, for me, this one sort of ties everything together. They do a chapter on it. But this one can really have its place everywhere because I believe that's how big of a deal it is that we have a smartphone with limitless technology and limitless expansion of knowledge and understanding and not even really wise understanding, but just understanding, just We know what's happening in a prime minister race in Malaysia because when we were wonderfully and blissfully ignorant in the 90s and early 2000s, the smartphone comes on the scene. And while it's brought a lot of help in some ways, and it's helped make a lot of things better in some ways, it's done something so drastic and honestly so dangerous, we really haven't even seen the ramifications of this yet. Technology, what Andrew says and Christians say here, what they say, technology is by far the greatest social force shaping modern parenting. So it's inescapable. In my house right now, which, by the way, if you're watching this on YouTube, I'm in an unrenovated kitchen. I thought it'd be hilarious to film here. But if you're looking around, I have an Amazon Echo, another Amazon Alexa, I have my phone, my laptop, my TV. You know, some of us have gone completely Amish on this because we're just so sick of all the technology. I get that. But even our kids' homeschool evaluators are coming in here going, they need to be familiar with an iPad. They need to figure out how to type. Typing is everything. So whereas our days were spent riding bikes around town, spying on your brother so he wouldn't go too far outside the neighborhood, now it is common to see teenagers exchange in-person interactions just for digital interactions. They don't do the in-person interaction. In fact, it fills them full of anxiety, according to the book Anxious Generation. It's one of the things that our young generation is forgetting how to do is have basic conversation, basic eye-to-eye impact. Makes people incredibly anxious and nervous now, and high statistics. And so they prefer digital interactions, not only because they can put a lot of buffers between them and somebody else, they don't have to expose a real version of themselves, but they get to do multi-tasked things while they correspond with other people, which means they never have to give anyone their full attention. And so what we have here is an overexposure to social media alongside the algorithmic manipulation that is built into apps, and it's really causing a generational crisis of mental health, one that has been unprecedented. We have no idea what this looks like. We have no idea what this is going to look like in 20 years. None. And to say this, to kind of fully connect back to the beginning, you don't know what your kid's going through. You didn't have this. I didn't have this. I didn't get a smartphone until I was in seminary. I had a BlackBerry while I was working at my first job as a church, but it wasn't like 2011, 2012, I got my first smartphone. So I only had a smartphone for 12 years, and it shaped that much of our culture. So technology, something that can be harnessed for good. I'm not stupid. I understand that. But we have to realize that it is shaping us. It is forming us. It's training us in its image. If Christian parents, this is what Andrew says, are not intentional about having a technology policy in their home, then you'll lose your kids to a go with the flow attitude. You will. Because we were always serving somebody and we're always being shaped by something. And so if we're not in service to Jesus and we're not being shaped by his word, something else will come along, and with it, skewed versions of sexuality, and a skewed identity apart from God's created order and purpose and design for his people. And with that, technology will be the avenue by which it is operating. So we have to be very careful. Thoughtless and harmful technological consumption needs to be part of the voice of the church. Finally, the last issue, political hostility. Everyone's favorite conversation. Everyone loves talking about politics. But Andrew is a king of political speech and knows how to attach biblical ethics to this pursuit of caring what goes on in our culture. So let's just read what he has to say. If you have the article, it's at crossway.org. It's 4 issues your children are facing you never had to. And again, get the book. But this is what he says. As American culture has grown more secular, society has removed Christianity from the center of cultural self-understanding. He says, yes, we celebrate Christmas in America, but if one were to state the Bible's teaching on marriage, he would find himself facing incredible hostility. This puts Christians in the United States in the uncomfortable position of trying to hold on to both their Christian identity and their American identity. And then he asks the questions, can the two coexist? Well, Andrew and Christian think they can, but it will require Christian parents to lean into their Christian identity and to disciple their children with even greater intentionality as not to see their kids become incredibly captivated by simply a president and a nation rather than a king and a kingdom. Who is your first allegiance? This is probably the area of which they are becoming the most drenched. Kids are involved in politics with really very little understanding of policy or the impact of policy. We have a candidate right now that's really running on the excitement of gender and ethnicity, at least at the beginning, and has not really made a policy clear. And then we have a former president trying to get back into the seat who has an army of people in his corner throwing his name everywhere in every YouTube commercial, just flagrantly. I mean, so politics is an inescapable force when it comes to what our children are consuming. And so he says this also puts strain on Christian families as they consider how to educate their children. And so Christians must be very discerning about how their children are then educated. And so this isn't saying you can't send your kids to public school. This isn't saying you should send your kids only to private or homeschool. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that you need to be very, very, very discerning about how your children are educated. While it may seem inconceivable from how we grew up, being a Christian parent in America today will require us to have a theology of persecution for our children. I know this is not something we want to hear because our default mechanism is to just pretend everything's okay, and that's less that we have to deal with. And this isn't a tornado warning. This isn't something where we're basically asking or advising everyone to just run around like a chicken with your head cut off, because it's just tough out there, and it's tough for holiness, it's tough for righteousness, the pursuit of righteousness specifically. What we are seeing every day are that Christians are far more persecuted outside of America than in America. But hostility is still hostility. And so what your kids are facing that sort of connects all of these issues together, so they stand up for what is right politically, if they stand up for what is right when it comes to technology consumption, they stand up for what is right when it comes to biblical identity, if they stand up for what is right when it comes to biblical sexuality, they need to be prepared to be outcasted. They need to be prepared to have a closer, tight-knit, fewer friends circle, instead of really seeking the approval of mankind and understanding their identity is not attached to that approval, but the approval of God above. And so they need to be prepared for this. And a great way to prepare them for that is for the parents to live this out themselves. This is not the time for do as I say, not as I do. This is a time of let's do this together, where they can remember that their home is a safe place where mom and dad didn't just tell us what to do, but they lived it out with their lives in the quiet, non-showy, non-flash, non-pragmatic version of Christianity each and every day, morning and night, faithfully, loyally, obediently, looking into the Word, seeking the wisdom of God, praying on our knees, attending the fellowship, giving and serving to the name of the Lord and to the growth of the kingdom, and just doing so because we love Jesus. So understand the hope here has not changed. The hope here has not changed for thousands of years. The hope here is still Christ and the preservation of his people through the power of the Holy Spirit, of which without we would have no hope. Thank you guys so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Remember, you can subscribe wherever podcasts are platformed. We look forward to seeing you next time here on We Bear Witness. God bless.
Thanks, everybody, for listening. If you like what you heard today and you want to hear more, don't forget to subscribe wherever you're hearing the podcast. If you have any comments, questions, or concerns, leave a comment, or you can email us at WBWPodcast@gmail.com. We'd be happy to hear your thoughts on the episode. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.